ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, accompanied by Congressman Kanjorski, the President of King's College, Reverend James Lankenmeyer, and the Student Government President, Patrick Murphy.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to welcome you this afternoon and to invite you to participate enthusiastically in the historic visit of President Bill Clinton to the Wyoming Valley, to the city of Wilkes-Barre, and to King's College. Mayor McGroarty, a special welcome to you. In your very first days as mayor, you faced a major crisis with uncommon imagination and energy. Some of this, I think, you learned as a student at King's College. A welcome also to Commissioners Crossan and Jones and the chair of the commission, Tom Makowski of the King's class of 1974. To Representative Kevin Blum and State Senator Ray Musto of the class of 71, who represent this district and higher education so well in Harrisburg. I was pleased to welcome Governor Tom Ridge a little while ago. He had to leave. This was the occasion of his first, but surely not his last visit to King's. Congressman Kanjorski, you are no stranger to this auditorium. You attend the King's commencement here nearly every year, and in this room you became an honorary King's alumnus in 1989. Some of your predecessors were legendary figures in the history of this valley, but they do not overshadow you. You have set a new standard for constituent service. You combine vision and imagination with genuine concern for those in our society whose access to employment, to health care, and to education is not assured. The people of the Wyoming Valley and the King's College community salute you. President Clinton, I understand that you will turn 50 in 1996. Well, so does King's College. "50 years ago, in 1946, 10 Holy Cross priests and 2 laymen came from the University of Notre Dame to found a college for the sons of the working poor, most of them GIs returning from service in the Second World War. Now 2,400 students, 300 faculty and staff, 14,000 alumni, and thousands of friends and supporters are celebrating the experience of 50 years of educational service and commitment to this community. You are the first of many visitors who will come to King's during this Jubilee year, and you are very welcome. Mr. President, one of your themes for young people is service. With us today are 4 AmeriCorps volunteers who I'd ask to stand. They are 1995 graduates of the University of Portland in Oregon and the University of Notre Dame, both sister schools to King's College. These Holy Cross associates are working with poor clients at the St. Vincent de Paul Kitchen, the Commission on Economic Opportunity, the Human Services Associates, and Legal Services of Northeastern Pennsylvania, and we salute them. Another of your concerns for young Americans, and some not so young, is affordability of higher education. Of 1,800 full-time students at King's, nearly 1,400 are recipients of federal aid. This year, these 1,400 students have been awarded a total of $1.25 million in federal grants, but even more striking, however, is that these same 1,400 students have Stafford and Perkin loans totaling $6 million in loans. The same is true for students of our other private four-year colleges in this area, College Misericordia and Wilkes University, whose presidents are here with us. We appreciate your efforts to preserve the Guaranteed Student Loan Program, the Direct Loan Lending Program, and even more, your commitment to the Pell Grant Program. Mr. President, in your State of the Union address just a few weeks ago, you challenged Americans to pursue ambitious social and moral goals. You concluded saying, "Bound by a faith more powerful than any doctrines that divide us, by our belief in progress, our love of liberty, and our relentless search for common ground, America has always sought and risen to the challenge." Mr. President, you come to a community that rises to challenges that come our way: economic challenges, social and cultural challenges, educational challenges, and even the challenge of natural disaster. The citizens of this community and the students of this college will rise to the challenges you laid out in your address. Mr. President, welcome to the Wyoming Valley, to the city of Wilkes-Barre, and to King's College. It is my pleasure and my privilege to present the Honorable Paul Kanjorski, Member of Congress representing this district.
Mr. President, distinguished folks on the dais, 4,000 happy people in Wyoming Valley, and to those tens of thousands that would have liked to have been here. This is an historic moment in Wyoming Valley and northeastern Pennsylvania. It was 24 years ago this summer that another former president of the United States came here on an official visit, and that was Richard Nixon. And we had just been inundated from mountain to mountain with the greatest natural catastrophe to ever strike any community or group of communities in the United States. No one that ever lived in Wyoming Valley in 1972 will ever forget 1972. And that president at that time said that northeastern Pennsylvania, Luzerne County, and Wyoming Valley would never suffer that catastrophe again. Unfortunately, 14 years went by and no action was taken. But in 1986, the Congress of the United States did act to bring about flood levee raising along the Susquehanna River. But for 10 long years, it has not happened. 3 years ago, Bill Clinton got elected president. And since that time, with the help of Governor Casey, now Governor Ridge, Senator Specter, Senator Wofford, Senator Santorum, former County Commissioner Rose Tucker, Frank Crossan, Jim Phillips, and the present County Commissioners, Tom Mikowski, Frank Crossan, and Red Jones. And last night, with representatives of this president, this community, executed an agreement with all the parties that the Wyoming Valley levee system will rise. I don't know how we could express it, but I think when that happened, and the next time when a flood occurs, never again, Mr. President, will we have to see a headline like this. Because the next time we get a flood, the Wyoming Valley levee system will protect all the citizens of Wyoming Valley. I can't tell you what a pleasure it has been these last 3 years to serve as a member of Congress representing this area under the leadership of President Bill Clinton. He gets things done he never forgets. An incredible memory, an incredible memory. I've never met a brighter man. He gets things done, he understands what people need and what America needs and what this area needs. He's there, his administration is there, and in the audience tonight we have high-ranking government officials that have accompanied the President over the last several days to get all this done. We know, as having suffered the great national disasters of the past, that you can't just clean up after the flood, you've got to prevent them. The action this administration has taken, and with his leadership this last 3 years, we're going to get that done. When he was a young man at 16, he was at the White House, and he visited with another Catholic president, first in the American history, John Kennedy. And he tells a story very often of how, in talking with the president then, he realized that he would someday like to be president. And he realized that dream. I have the pleasure now of introducing a young man here at King's College, who's the president of the student body here, active in rhodecy, a senior, psychology major, and a fine young man who just told the president out there he intends to go to law school someday, so maybe we have another little Bill Clinton coming along. I served in Congress as a page when I was his age, but I never got to introduce a president of the United States. For those illustrious purposes, it is my grand and great privilege to introduce this fine young man, a student here, a senior at King's College, to introduce the President of the United States.
Thank you, Congressman Kanjorski, for your kind words. Good afternoon. On behalf of King's College and the city of Wilkes-Barre, it is my great pleasure to welcome President Bill Clinton, Congressman Paul Kanjorski, Mayor Tom McGroarty, and other distinguished guests. It is my great honor to stand before these people who continually embody the compassion, courage, and vision it takes to lead this city, this state, and this nation. In 1972, Tropical Storm Agnes flooded and devastated Wilkes-Barre and the surrounding area. The efforts of the people in the community to overcome the devastation distinguished this area as the Valley with a heart. Congressman Dan Flood and President Richard Nixon provided the leadership and support which enabled the Wyoming Valley to rise again and overcome the damage. 1 month ago, the storm of the century ravaged the Wyoming Valley. Again, the waters rose to dangerous levels. Our community was flooded, and lives were tragically lost. So today, President Clinton, we thank you for displaying the valor and leadership which we have come to know and expect. We are reminded of the leadership which King's College was built upon 50 years ago when Father Connerton from the University of Notre Dame started our school for the sons of the Valley's coal miners. We are honored by your presence at King's College and hope you agree this really is the Valley with a heart. It is now my great honor and privilege to introduce the President of the United States, Bill Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think, thank you very much. I want to begin by saying that Patrick Murphy did not have the easiest job in the world today, and that all of his fellow students who stood up and cheered him may have made it a little harder even. But he hung in there and he did it very well, and he spoke powerfully about this community and his people, and I think we ought to give him another hand. Thank you. Father Lockenmeyer, I want to congratulate you on the 50th anniversary of King's College. You know, the Vice President was in Pennsylvania just a couple of days ago to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first computer, ENIAC, over in Philadelphia. So Pennsylvania now has 3 50-year-olds, ENIAC, King's College, and me. When your president said that the King's College was 50 and so was I going to be 50 this year, I looked out at all the students and I thought, it looks a lot better on you than it does on me. I was delighted to be here today to review the flood damage and hear a progress report with your 2 United States senators, with Governor Ridge, with Congressman Holden, who is also here and does a very fine job for his district in Congress, and with Congressman Kanjorski, who spoke today so well. I can tell you that there aren't very many people in the Congress that are as effective, as persistent, and downright nagging in advancing the interest of the people of their district as Paul Kanjorski. You are very well served. He is always nice, he is always dignified, but he is utterly relentless in your behalf, no matter what the issue is. And I want to congratulate your young mayor, Mayor McGroarty. It's been a long time since I met a public official with so much energy and enthusiasm. I don't know if he ever sleeps. And if we could bottle whatever it is he has and reproduce it, we wouldn't have to build any power plants in America for 10 years. I think he's got a great future. I also want to thank all the federal officials who are here with me, and in particular, the gentleman who's behind me, James Lee Witt, the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, who's been spending more time with you and more time in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho than he has in Washington, D.C. in the last several weeks. He is the kind of person, I think, that reflects the very best in our national government, the true spirit of public service. And all the federal officials here, including the local representatives of all these agencies, I want to thank them as well. They have enjoyed having the opportunity to work with you in this difficult time. I'd like to say one more word about Patrick Murphy because it makes the point I want to make. I'm not going to make fun of him anymore. When this disaster was imminent, he and his brother, JJ, led fellow students to help fill and pile sandbags. A lot of other young people did that as well. Some of the young AmeriCorps volunteers who were introduced, our National Service volunteers, also worked on that program. As a lot of you know, the AmeriCorps program is now headed in Washington by your former Senator, Harris Wofford, who also helped to create the Peace Corps. I want to say that we need to find ways to multiply the spirit shown by Patrick Murphy, by the AmeriCorps volunteers, by the students of King's College, if we're going to meet our country's challenges. A couple of days ago, I was out in Washington State and Oregon viewing the floods there. You may have seen the films. And I went into the home of a 70-year-old man. He and his wife had literally just lost everything they had. He was hard of hearing, and he even lost his hearing aid in the flood. The water washed it away. And I thought to myself, how do you start over when you're 70? I was walking down the street toward this man. I thought, how will he feel when I come there? And he said to me, I'm so glad to see you. And I've never met a president before, but maybe it wasn't time. This is the first time I've ever been able to invite a president into a home with an indoor swimming pool. And I thought, you know, this is a pretty great country. And the man went on and introduced me to his wife and his 2 daughters and his granddaughter. And he was raving about how all of his friends and neighbors came to his aid. And they were talking about a man I later met who was a retired utility company employee, a naturalized immigrant from Norway who had worked 8 hours with a jackhammer, well up in his 60s, with a cracked rib. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to hold a jackhammer in the proper place before, but it isn't easy if you're young, strapping, strong, and you can breathe well. But I was looking at all these people. We were having this talk, and when I left this man's home, I said, I'm really impressed with your sense of humor and the way you and your wife are handling this. He said, as awful as it is, he said, it's wonderful. Look how we're all behaving. He said, don't you wish we could be this way all the time? So I say to the people of the Wyoming Valley, to all the communities that were hurt so badly, to the people in the rest of Pennsylvania who suffered so greatly, all of the members of the families of people who lost their lives and those who have suffered heartbreaking losses. Our country has been very moved by your spirit and by what you have done. Our country has been very moved by individual examples of courage. Just a few moments ago, I was meeting in a round table with some people who worked in this flood and some of your local officials. I met young Eric Malone, who's behind me, a 19-year-old world champion jet skier who lives just outside Altoona, who found out you could run a jet ski in a raging flood and saved a lot of lives as a result and risked his own life. And I thank him for doing that. I asked him if he would give me a ride on his jet ski, but only on a calm lake. I want to thank Dr. Christopher Brysether, the president of Wilkes College, who was with us today. Some of the students are there, I guess. for the difficult work he had to do in evacuating his school. I want to thank Gene Wild of the Wilkes-Barre from Mercy Hospital, who evacuated people there. And you know that you always think of a hospital taking people in. Can you imagine the psychological pressure of evacuating a hospital, the one place every community looks to be a pillar of strength and security and hope? I want to thank Jim Syracuse, the Lucerne County Emergency Management Director. Who coordinated the evacuation of 100,000 people. I'll tell you, folks, when something like this happens, you know, because news is instantaneous, I become just almost like another American. I get most of my information off of breaking television news. And all of America was watching you and pulling for you. And we never knew, I don't think, how serious this was, even with all the gushing water we kept seeing, until we learned that you had to evacuate 100,000 people. That got America's attention. There are so many others that I would mention if I knew them or if we had the time. I just want to say that I applaud all of you who look beyond your own needs to help others and to help people get through this crisis. You have really shown us, as that elderly gentleman in Washington said, that America can rise to its challenges and show its best self. And I thank you for that. Mr. Witt and I worked together for years in Arkansas, where I was the governor. We saw whole little communities buried in floods. We rescued people off the roofs of their house. We have a state with the highest per capita incidence of tornadoes in the country. I have seen whole communities decked by tornadoes. I've seen wind blowing so hard that literally thin sheets of paper were going so strong they pierced the bark of trees. I've seen trucks in the tops of trees and houses moved a half a block off their foundations with the foundations apparently untouched. And of course, I have seen a lot of people who lost everything. And I would just say this, for all the wonderful things you have done, it's important to remember that the people who really sustained great losses were more or less in shock for the first several days after it occurred. And a lot of the most difficult times will come now, and maybe even a week or two or a month from now. So I ask you to remember that, because this is something the federal government can't do, that one-on-one personal commitment it takes to get people all the way through a tragedy. I will say this, I know that the work of rebuilding and repairing this state is not over when the floodwaters go down or when the emergencies have passed. And I do want to assure you that we will do everything we can to continue to do our part until this state and all its communities are completely rebuilt. I know that about 32,000 people registered for help through FEMA at the 800 number, or one of our disaster centers, that we've had over 19,000 home inspections already, that more than $23 million in payments have been applied for and dispensed through the disaster housing program. I want to compliment Denise Ginger, who's also up on the stage with me. She was at our roundtable, and she got her check within 2 days of her home inspection, and there it was, and she wasn't sure what it was for, because there it was 2 days later, and she was such an honorable person, she would not cash that government check until she made absolutely sure what it was for. I told her if we had 1 million more Americans like her, we wouldn't have any problems in this country. And I thank her. Stand up there. Thank you. Stand up. Thank you. We have approved more than 600 small business loans worth about $10.5 million to help small businesses and individual homeowners and renters and nonprofit organizations and some not so small businesses as well. The Department of Transportation has now committed over $20 million. I told the mayor today that We were going to give him $400,000 to fix that canal along Parkin Street where I was, to make sure that it doesn't break again and that it is still a protection against the floods. We are going to keep working with you until this job is finished. That's what we did in working with Florida and California and the states along the Mississippi River. And we want to do what Congressman Kanjorski says. We want to prevent these problems from coming again. In 1993, in the wake of those horrible floods, those 500-year floods in the Middle West, the Congress passed legislation that I strongly supported to enable us to take up to 15% of the value of the disaster payments to a state when something like this happens, to be spent on mitigation, to try to protect people against it recurring. And I said today I was very encouraged by my conversations with the governors. When we get a Pennsylvania state plan, we will look forward to putting that money in here, and we want to see people protected from having to go through this again. And in so far as we can, we will work with you until that job is done as well. I'd like to close with a few words that refer to some of the things the president of this college talked about in his opening remarks. If you look at what happens in this flood, you know that when our country works together, we never lose. If you ask me what is the lesson that you have learned most clearly in the last 3 years and a few weeks as president, I would have to tell you that that is the lesson I have learned. The era of big government is fading. We now have the smallest federal government we've had in 30 years. All big organizations are going through changes. We see that everywhere. It's part of the information and technology revolution that's going on. We don't need large, big, centralized bureaucracies to solve grassroots problems or to perform big national functions. We know that. But that does not mean that we can go back to a time in America where people were simply left to fend for themselves. One of the great and enduring contributions of the Catholic Church to this country are the Catholic charities and the mission you see in every Catholic college and university in this country of service, of understanding that we are all stronger when we help each other to live up to our God-given capacities. And that is something every American must remember as we move into this new age. We are working to balance the budget in Washington. We should do that. We never ran a permanent deficit in this country just all the time until about the early 80s. We cut the deficit in half in the last 3 years. We ought to finish the job, but we ought to do it consistent with our values, which include our responsibilities to each other, to our parents, to our children, to families who have disabled children. That's what we ought to do. And if you look at the challenges that I tried to set before our nation for the future in the State of the Union address, in every single instance, there is something for everyone to do, including your government. It should be smaller, but it should not be weak. When the floods come, you don't want FEMA and the Small Business Administration and the Department of Transportation to be weak. When we argue to open markets so our people can get a fair deal in selling their goods and services abroad, you don't want a trade program that is weak. And when people tell you that government is inherently no good, just remember this: in the last 30 years, we have spent 1/2 of your money, 1/2 of the taxes that you paid to the federal government on 3 things: national defense, Social Security, and Medicare. What did you get for that? We won the Cold War. The poverty rate among elderly people was cut in half. And if you live to be 65 and you start drawing Medicare in America, elderly people have the longest life expectancy of any group of elderly people in the entire world. I think we got our money's worth. Part of my college education was paid for by a National Defense Education loan. I was proud to pay it back on time with interest, but I was proud to get it too. I think America was better off because people in my generation were able to get help to go to college. And these young people today live in a time when the percentage of a family's income, a middle-class family's income required to finance a college education is far greater than it was when my generation went to college. So I say to you, we should invest in scholarships for children who need it. We should invest in the college loan program. We should do that. I have sent a budget to the Congress consistent with the balanced budget plan that will let 1 million young people engage in work-study programs so they can help to work themselves through college, and that would give our families a tax deduction for the cost of college tuition up to $10,000 a year. I think that's the kind of thing we ought to have. So I ask you to think about these challenges that we face. How are we going to build stronger families and give every child a childhood? How are we going to guarantee quality education to all Americans? How are we going to declare or develop a system for economic security for working families? You know, this is an amazing economy we have. We have more new businesses started every year than ever before. The last 3 years, every year broke a record. We have more new self-made millionaires than ever before. Not people who gave them anything, people who used the opportunities of this age. But we also have more than half of our wage earners working harder without ever getting a raise. And we have in a lot of big companies people who got downsized in these corporations who now don't know what they're supposed to do. And we have to find things for them to do. So what we have to do is to find a way consistent with our values to keep the economy going, to keep creating more jobs, but to do it in a way that enables every American working family to benefit from that, consistent with our values. And we know if we grow together, that we'll all be better off. If everybody has a chance, we're all better off. That's the kind of thing I want you to think about. If every single challenge, you have to ask yourself, what should I be doing about that? What should my community be doing about that? Can my church, can my synagogue do something about that? Should my state do something about that? Should my nation do something about that? Whether it's a challenge for more jobs or safer streets or a cleaner environment or working to keep the world more peaceful and secure for our children and their future, we have to do everything we can to work together. And I'm doing what I can to see that this government continues on its course of reform and does more every day to earn your trust and respect. But I just want to say this. Do you ever notice how there are no cynics in a flood? You know cynics in a tornado. There are never any cynics in a natural disaster. Why? Cynicism is a luxury you cannot afford when you have work to do. And one of the things I want to say to you is that these young people and their enthusiasm today, and those 4 young people doing their service through AmeriCorps, that's what makes this country great. The spirit of people like this young man, he could have, he could have said, I'm 19 years old, I've got 60, 70 years to live. I like riding my jet ski and winning prizes. Why should I risk my neck putting that jet ski in a raging river? He could have stayed home. And no one would have ever known the difference. No one. That is the way we ought to live every day. It really bothers me when I hear people say, well, they don't believe in our country and we can't make progress and everything's not going to get better and none of these people we put in office are any good. That's a bunch of bull. And it's a lousy excuse for inaction. It's a lousy excuse for inaction. Just remember something. I have one opportunity that none of you can ever have unless you get to be president, and it has nothing to do with me. Whenever I leave the borders of the United States of America and I go to other countries and I see people cheering, they are not cheering for Bill Clinton. They are not even cheering for the president. They are cheering for America. And I cannot possibly convey, I don't have the words to tell you what it feels like to represent all of you and to be the country in the eyes of people from other lands. But I can tell you this, they know we're a pretty great place. John Kennedy said once in the middle of the Cold War that freedom has many difficulties, and our country was far from perfect, but we never had to put up a wall to keep our people in. And I want all of you to remember that. I believe that the young people at this college are facing the greatest future, the greatest age of possibility our country has ever known. But every one of us knows that we have enormous challenges. There's a lot of people fulfilling their dreams, but we have to make the American dream available to everybody willing to work for it. There are a lot of people who are doing well, but there are still things that are dividing our people when we ought to be pulling together and being united. And when you are tempted to give up on your country, or to give up on yourself, or to give up on your community, or to give up on some problem you're facing your family, remember this flood. And remember how people just showed up and did what they were supposed to do. Remember how courage seemed ordinary, and how cynicism was a luxury nobody could afford. And if you can recapture that, then your community, your state, and your nation will have a future that is better than anything that has happened so far. Thank you, and God bless you all. Come back.